this session about wiretapping, digital wiretapping, and I will specifically speak about the situation here in the Netherlands. So it's about surveillance in the lowlands. For all you people that are coming from abroad, you probably look upon the Netherlands as a quite liberal country. You can smoke dope here, you can go to hacker conferences. Well, the situation is a little bit more complicated than that. With lawful interception of telecommunications, the situation in Holland is quite more serious than in most other European countries. We are much further in legislation, we are much further, I think, in the actual capabilities that law enforcement have to do digital interception. So let me tell you how digital wiretaps in the Netherlands are organized. They started with making a new telecommunications law here a few years ago, and it has one chapter about the lawful access. And the most important thing is that all telecommunication companies, telephone companies, ISPs, anything in between or similar like that, need to make their network fit for interception. That means they need to implement an architecture that makes it possible for law enforcement to intercept traffic. So this is about having an interface to deliver wiretap material to a law enforcement facility. Second point is the companies, telecommunication companies, have to pay themselves for this architecture. So they have to pay, which especially for smaller companies can be small ISPs, local ISPs. It can be quite a big burden. For the actual wiretaps itself, the ISP can charge administrative and personal costs. But that's a different story than the equipment, the architecture, and the interface. We are now past the date. There was a date, 1st of April, when all telecommunication companies in the Netherlands had to have this ready. They had to have their interface installed. This means equipment to actually intercept the traffic of the customer, and secondly, the interface to be able to transport the intercepted traffic to the law enforcement facility. Yesterday, Paul Wouters did a presentation on the protocol called Transfer of Intercepted Internet Traffic, TIIT, which is basically the protocol that is used to do this transfer of intercepted material, which is a encrypted deliverance of the material to law enforcement. For law enforcement to be able to have a digital wiretap, that is regulated by criminal code in Holland, and it requires a court order. The word court order is subject to erosion in this country. Originally, a court order should be something like a judge reviewing the case, making a judgment if it's necessary that in this investigation wiretaps are being used, and then deciding on how many wiretaps for which period. In the meantime, the amount of wiretaps that are given out by courts in Holland, that figure is so high, and I will tell you the figure later on, that it's not possible to do that kind of detailed review. I mean, it's just hundreds and hundreds of wiretaps going to these courts every week. So this is a rubber stamp procedure now. More serious is even that prosecutors can order wiretaps themselves, which are basically afterwards reviewed by a judge. So The court order is something that sounds very beautiful, but in reality it's something you should not take very high. Technically, the system works different than what you know about the carnivore story. Here there is a clear division between interception and analysis of the traffic. The ISP needs to do the interception. He needs to do it with his own equipment, with his own personnel, and he needs to figure out himself how to do it. He is getting rules about what the intercept should be made of, so which is the minimum requirements for the intercept, which is always full content. There is no division between headers and content. It's everything. It's just a raw, full content, full TCP IP copy. ISP is intercepting at their own facility. Law enforcement is getting the full stream real time of the subject they're investigating, and law enforcement is doing their own analysis. Regarding ISPs, we have more or less 3 situations in Holland where law enforcement will ask data. The first, most common use is law enforcement asking for subscriber information. Basically, law enforcement asking the ISP to go through its customer records and find out stuff like a username, please match it with a name and address so we can start an investigation for that person. Probably other way around will also be used, like, this is the real name of a person, please tell us which username that person has. Second situation is law enforcement looking for traffic data, looking for log files. They might have a username, they might have an IP number, and they might have time and date, and they will then ask information about what happens with that IP number, with time and date. In many cases, it will be just plain radius authentication information. The third possibility is law enforcement having a warrant for a full wiretap. Just plain wiretap. Just give me everything going to the customer and coming from the customer. No filtering, nothing, just give me everything going to that person. Traffic data is quite complicated subject at the moment, especially regarding what is happening now in with the Cybercrime Treaty and in Europe with MFOPOL plans on data retention and data preservation. Basically, the situation in the Netherlands at this moment is that ISPs are not required to do any data preservation. So if law enforcement will ask them for traffic data, they can say, sorry, we don't have that. It's possible. Of course, reality is that ISPs log. They don't log because law enforcement tells them to do it. They log for all kinds of internal reasons, to be able to have an abuse policy or to be able to do all kinds of system administrative stuff. So they're logging anyway. In many cases, it's possible for law enforcement to get radius records or to get information from radius records. There's one exception outside ISPs that we have. GSM operators are required to log location data for prepaid GSMs, but only for the prepaid ones. The story behind that is that when prepaid GSMs were introduced in Holland, there was a discussion about having people to identify when they buy a prepaid card, so you know who is behind a certain telephone number. GSM operators very successfully resisted against that idea, so there's no registration But there is a device called the IMSI catcher. It's a device made by Rohr and Schwarz, a big company in Germany. It's a device that is a mobile device which is able to basically pretend it's a GSM base station, and it can like catch the hardware number of a mobile phone. So if police is chasing, doing covert surveillance on a person that has a prepaid GSM, they will be able, if they drive quite close to the person, they will be able to retrieve the hardware number of the phone. And then with the hardware number of the phone, they go to the GSM operator and they request a wiretap on that number. And then it doesn't matter anymore if the subject is changing prepaid cards, because the phone is keeping the same hardware number. It's a long story to explain why there is this exception for prepaid GSM. Of course, the plans that are now circulating in Infopol in Europe will worsen the situation, because the requirements in Holland for traffic data are quite limited at the moment, and the ideas in Europe are going between preservation of data traffic from 3 months to 1 year, and some English law enforcement people are even talking about 7 years. Because there has been so much talk about carnivore, maybe good to shortly explain the difference between a system like carnivore and the system that is used here in the Netherlands. With carnivore, it's law enforcement that intercepts. So law enforcement has a box, puts it sealed at the ISP, filters and intercepts the traffic and doing the analysis. So they do basically everything, which is quite different than in the Netherlands. Also, the whole debate, the legal debate in the States about carnivore is about the fact that that box is used in different situations. It's used when the warrant is limited to a pen registry type warrant, where you are only allowed to intercept traffic data. But the same box with the same capability is also used for situations where there is a full content wiretap. So the whole discussion is about how do you know that a sealed box that is intercepting traffic data is not intercepting full content? If you look at the statistics on digital wiretapping, then it's good to go into the history a little bit and to see what happened with normal telephone in the past. There are not many statistics. There is a lot of secrecy about statistics, and in a few minutes you will really understand why. There is a 1996 report from the Ministry of Justice, and that is about the situation in 93 and 94, and there were 3,000 telephone intercepts, and when I talk about intercepts I talk about full content, nothing else, void content. And the number of telephone taps is based on the number on telephone numbers, so it's not the number of warrants or anything like that, just actual numbers. 3,000. Which all have an average length of 4 weeks. And the Ministry of Justice themselves concluded that there are more intercepts than in any other European country. And I'm talking about 93, 94. So Germany, England, France, they couldn't find figures which are higher. There is a lot of suspicion about England, if the figures in England are actually correct. Then if you look at the start of the GSM explosion, when GSM became big in the Netherlands, that's around 98. You see that in 98 the amount of intercepts raised to 10,000. And 3,000 of that was a plain old telephone system. And 7,000 of that was GSM. So the introduction of GSM resulted in an enormous growth of the number of intercepts. Let me tell you something about the interception infrastructure. Traditionally, Dutch police has regions, and every region has its main office, and every main office had its own interception facility, where the tape recorders were based to record telephone conversations. With all the new technology coming, they are concentrating the whole thing in 3 national interception facilities, which are more up to date with the latest technology. They opened one March last year. It's a facility that can do 10,000 simultaneously intercepts, internet, telephone, GSM, everything, 1,000 simultaneously. And very proudly, in their own magazine, they called it the biggest law enforcement interception center in Europe, which made us very proud. They're building 2 more of these. And these 3 interception centers will then be organized within an organization called the LEO, the National Interception Organization, and that is going to be in Holland the main responsible organization for organizing law enforcement interception. For subscriber data, access to subscriber data, we have a completely separate system, which is at the moment only functioning for GSM and telephone operators. But I wouldn't be surprised that in the near future ISPs are added to that system. It's called the CIOT, and it's a system where this government agency has real-time access to the subscriber databases of telephone companies. No, we don't. At the moment, they still need one. But it's completely electronic, so the warrant is a digital signed electronic document. It's built in such a way by using cryptography that the telephone company can't see when and how its database is being accessed. They can't see which agency is accessing it. So this government department is actually working as an anonymizer for different agencies, because not only law enforcement is using it, also the national security services are using it. So the companies are never able to see who is accessing the database.
Excuse me, just a quick question.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then how, if I'm prosecuted and brought to court, how do I challenge whether the warrant was valid or not? The people being patent never know if the warrant was there, never know when it was tapped or anything. How do I defend myself against that?
Yeah. Well, there is the first thing, there is not so much to defend against, because this is subscriber data. This is matching. Yeah. Well, this is only about matching the telephone number or username to a real name. Of course, there is a warrant that should be part of the dossier that the prosecutor is presenting in the court. But the telephone company has no role in this process. Completely outside. It has a plausible denial. Digital wiretap forecast. Some time ago, figures leaked out that the National Organization of Dutch ISPs made internally. It's their idea of what will happen in the coming 3 years. And they made up this forecast. The percentage is the percentage of the total amount of users, usernames, accounts, telephone numbers, whatever. No, sorry, not telephone numbers. This is only about digital items. In the first year, they expect 1,500, and then next year 4,500, and third year 9,000. So add that up to the 10,000 I mentioned before for telephone systems in GSM, which will also grow. It means in the third year you're very close at 25,000, 30,000 intercepts in 1 year. So that's growth. The number of requests for subscriber information, they expect 15,000 requests for the first year, and that going to 300,000 requests in the third year. And look at the percentage in the third year, it's 5%. That means subscribers. So they expect, exactly, they expect, Dutch providers expect that in the third year of this system working, police will request subscriber information of every 1 out of 20 internet users. Of course, if you talk about interception, you very soon also start talking about cryptography. And the control of cryptography is one of the most important tools for governments to maintain their interception capabilities. Let me give you a short review of what happened to cryptography in Holland in the last 8 years. There was, once upon a time, a proposal to restrict end users, to restrict the use of end users by introducing a license scheme. And the license scheme would be made in such a way that only companies that could explain why they needed to encrypt their information were able to get a license. So it's a very complicated way to forbid cryptography. The plan didn't make it. There was a lot of resistance to it, and it was dropped. Then there was a proposal to have self-incrimination, so to have a law that would force a suspect to deliver clear text or keys when required. This plan is also dropped because of a lot of resistance, because it's of course a clear violation of the right of every suspect not to incriminate himself. So government is still looking for a new strategy how to deal with cryptography. The latest development is concentrating on trusted third parties. There is a big national program to stimulate and regulate the trusted third parties. And the idea that government is slowly trying to influence those TDPs with is, the idea is that if a TDP is doing any kind of confidentiality service, so any kind of service where material is encrypted, it should only be allowed to do so when it also stores keys. So the idea is not to force key escrow on everybody. You don't have to deliver your key. But if you use a TDP for your encryption services, then the TDP is required to store your key or be able to recover your key. The idea behind it is, of course, that TTPs, if they are really going into confidentiality services, they will generate an enormous growth of the use of cryptography. So if you can deal with that growth from a government perspective, if you implement key escrow. A small amount of users that is not using the TTP, you will deal with them in the traditional way. That may be what's happening now, like working keyboards. It's also a very efficient way that the FBI is using it. It's very unclear if this plan for TDPs is going to work, because TDPs work on the basis of trust, and if people think they can't trust a TDP, they will not be interested in the service. And also TDPs can decide to go to a country where they're not required to do key escrow. So the netto effect of this whole plan could just be that the deployment of TDPs in Holland will have an enormous delay compared to surrounding countries. Also, when you talk about interception, you can look at interception as a security risk. Having a structure for an interception means you make a hole in your system, which law enforcement can get in. Of course, you have to look very carefully if other people cannot also get in. The intercepted traffic in Holland from the ISP is, as I'm sure Paul Wouters told yesterday, is going through one single machine. Because the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, this is a peering point in Holland, has one government machine, one government router, and all ISPs that have to deliver their real-time intercepted traffic are delivering it to the IP number of that router. So all the traffic, law enforcement or national security services, is going through that one router. And Paul even wrote an article which has the MAC address of that machine. So. I would just like to point to a very good RFC 2804. That is a result of the Raven discussion inside the Internet Engineering Task Force. Started, I think it's 2 years ago. FBI came up to the Internet Engineering Task Force and told them, hey, if you make new IP protocols, please consider building in interception capabilities. That resulted in a discussion inside the task force called the Raven discussion, which was basically a mailing list. And it resulted in an RFC that explained why building in that kind of capabilities is a very big mistake, very wrong idea. The whole proposal in Holland regarding key escrow, if you read the government report about the possibilities to implement key escrow in trusted third parties, you will notice that at no point there is any interest in that report to the security risks of having key escrow. Having the single point of failure that a TDP with thousands and tens of thousands of keys is having on your infrastructure. And in general, you see in the Netherlands, but I think that is not very different from countries in Europe, that dealing with security, with telecommunication security, dealing with information security, is completely focusing on criminal code. The whole idea that you can contain all those risks by making laws and training law enforcement. And of course you can't. Of course there is public concern in the Netherlands about these developments, but it's limited for the very simple reason that most parties in Parliament think that fighting crime is a very important thing, and the rest are uninteresting details. The concerns and the critique on this is concentrating on a few points. First of all, the total lack of transparency regarding interception. There are no statistics. I mean, the figures I showed you are partly unofficial figures that leak, for example. You will not find a yearly report by the Ministry of Justice telling you how much wiretaps they did in the previous year. Very different from, for example, the United States, where every year an extremely detailed report is made by the Ministry of Justice. Also, the whole legislation which is dealing with this interception is a framework. If you read it, there is nothing inside. It just tells you we will intercept, and the details are something that law enforcement and ISPs have to deal with. So Parliament has never been confronted with the gory details of digital wiretaps. They just let law enforcement to take the decision on any details. The result is negotiations between government and ISPs. And those negotiations are, of course, are not in public. They are in closed rooms. There is sometimes some information coming out, sometimes not. In the meantime, most people will find it very, very difficult to know in which direction the interception policies are actually going. There is no accountability in all this stuff, apart from the statistics, but there is also no annual reports on policy. There is no oversight body. There is not like a government commission reviewing how intercepts went, like taking out 100 examples and reviewing them very carefully. Everything is left to the judges that have to sign their court orders. And if you talk about 10,000 intercepts a year, you can only conclude that those judges are very cooperative and are probably in a rubber stamp mode. So in general, I would say that the traditional safeguards that people are talking about, the safeguards that are keeping us apart from a real total surveillance society, those safeguards are eroding. The traditional idea that a judge will review law enforcement activities and will protect us from excessive intrusions is not valid anymore. These judges are just stamping things. Well, I hope we have a lot of questions, because we have, 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe, for comments, questions, whatever. Do we have like a wireless microphone? Or people just shout?
Now, over the ISP in Holland has the ability to just a communication that both to ensure that are not going to use that ability for someone else to go. Like a company can tell someone in the ISP to try and put up.
How do you know that ISPs are not intercepting traffic apart from the warrants they get? Intercepting for fun or intercepting for another class of clients? Well, you can't. It's very simple, you can't. I mean, ISPs have total control over their own network. You can't know. Yeah, that's another good point. The machines that are actually, I didn't talk about that because I guess that Paul talked about it yesterday. But actually, machines that are doing the intercepts are partly it's hardware that the ISPs buy, and that stuff has very limited documentation. It's very difficult for an ISP to know there is no backdoor in a piece of hardware like that. I think in the past year there has been quite some publicity about these figures and these facts, but it's not leading to a lot of concern, and there are all kinds of reasons for that. I mean, traditionally in Netherlands people have a very high trust in government. We don't have a big brother, we have a soft sister. No, I can't. No, I can't. And the whole reason why I can't is that this is really just starting. So, probably there are digital wiretaps at the moment, but I would be very surprised if there is more than just a few.
Last week, apparently, there was one that's
Yeah, there was some rumor from the ISP organization themselves that a new procedural step was taken, but still it's possible that using other kinds of warrants there have been digital wiretaps in the past also, but it must be very limited at the moment.
What I meant was that there is show this explosion of announced threats from the beginning of the 90s until now. That the criminals are also using much more devices than just one type of stuff. They are boxes to all those kinds.
Oh, sure. I mean, you should correct maybe that figure for the growth of the number of telephone devices.
Yeah.
Sure.
So let me think, we are talking about digital data so can be replicated and stored is there any chance, anything in the law that says that they have to be deleted or destroyed after being used in trial, or can be kept and maybe moved or used to maybe after 10 years or after 10 years, even in another country of the East?
Well, there's two situations here. If you talk like about traffic data, ISP's logs, they have some obligation to delete the logs after some time with privacy law. But for some applications, that period is really long. Like banks are allowed to keep that data for years and years. But you mean if there is a wiretap, can police keep that data? I'm not sure. I think they have a possibility to keep it for a few years, but I don't know exactly the details.
Has the Amsterdam government decided to explain why they feel they need the capability to do about 36,000 wiretaps?
Sorry, can you speak a little bit?
Has the Amsterdam government tried to explain why they feel they need the ability to do 36,000 wiretaps per year when they can only explain the need for 3,000?
There hasn't been any explanation for why there is such a high amount of wiretaps. People studying the stuff have their ideas about it, but there is not like an official policy statement.
They do. According to the figures that you have, they currently only show that they do about 3,000 wiretaps minus the phone. Prepaid.
I mean,
But they want a capability to do up to 36,000 average wiretap cycles per year. That's 12 times the amount that they say they need. On top of that, they're projecting it's like exponential growth for the next few years.
Well, let me just say that wiretapping has just become a really standard tool in any investigation. And in that way, it has really become a culture of I think, how law enforcement works here. I believe they consider it as a very efficient tool, very cost-effective. What I read about analysis of it is that in most cases it's not leading to evidence for court. Most stuff is used for technical reasons. So to combine with covert surveillance, for example. But
Are there any figures on how many criminal convictions actually rely on intercepted data?
as I just said, in most cases the interceptions don't lead to evidence. The role of interceptions is not so much having evidence in court, but much more technical support for investigations. So it's about finding out with whom the subject is in contact with, finding out when he's leaving the city, when he's coming back, that kind of support. Amount, you mean? Yeah. I don't have. No.
Is there any law in Holland that for the GSM company is not allowed to send an SMS to the customer that his phone is going to be tapped?
Yes, there is a law against that. In the telecommunications law, the companies are obliged to keep total secrecy about the intercepts that they're proceeding to. Sure. But that's a general rule, but there's a specific rule that the ISP has to keep secrecy about intercepts. And there's even a whole procedure of how to organize that secrecy. But I mean, that is not a new story. That is going on for years with telephone companies. There's nothing new about it.
When you talk about securing digital evidence, does that have any regulations on that, on what sort of protection of exchange evidence?
Yeah, but that is the story Paul told yesterday about the protocol. There is a whole forensic story around the interface and deliverance of the data, digitally signed and all that kind of stuff. We only have 1 minute left, so last question.
Because then you can effectively hide the end production by 1%. You will make that, they will see it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the question is if you would use cryptography, would that make you more of a suspect? Probably, in a lot of cases, probably. I think that in a lot of investigations, if one of the suspects is encrypting all this stuff, it would lead to the suspicion that that is something very interesting. Probably. I'm sorry time is over, so thank you very much.